Hey everybody, Eric Hayden here in the garden today. I want to talk about maintenance in the garden. We're going to go over deadheading. We're going to briefly go over why we deadhead, where to do it, and the reason why I'm doing it now as opposed to a couple weeks ago. If you want to see a much more detailed video, click below. Our first deadheading was back in May. I went through a much more detailed view of that. But the bottom line is roses every 5 to 7 weeks bloom. That's called a flush of blooms. When I lived in New York State, we had 2 flushes, June, late August into September. Here in North Carolina, we have 4 to 5. And you might say, well, Eric, you've been talking about deadheading for a while. How do you know you need to deadhead? Well, number one, when the wife is starting to work in the garden, you know you're letting some things slip. These are geraniums. I noticed this pile of spent blooms. My wife does some gardening with me, but mostly that's a hobby that I enjoy. But when she's starting to clean up the garden, you know that you're getting a bit behind. And if you've seen some of my videos, I've mentioned it, the blooms just look terrible. They pretty much all need to be deadheaded. And what you really want to avoid is this situation here where, I mean, these could have been deadheaded maybe even 10 days ago. The reason why you deadhead, as I mentioned before, you're removing these old petals, which number one prevents disease and insects from being in your garden and being more numerous. When you have old petals like that, they can harbor disease and insects. So if you get rid of that, that's a good thing for the overall health of the plant. The other reason why we deadhead, if you don't, Mother Nature is going to take its course. These are going to die, the petals, they're going to fall off, and eventually this is going to fall off, and then you will get new growth farther down on the plant. But that could take a couple extra weeks, whereas if you chop this off early, as soon as the bloom is spent, then you're going to start your next flush of blooms quicker. And again, when we talk about deadheading, what you really want to do ideally is when the blooms are at this stage, you're kind of falling apart. You want to go down, and some folks say the first set of 5 leaves or 3 leaves. If you do the first set of 5 leaves or a little bit farther down, so kind of a more harsh cut. The reason why you're doing that, these bud eyes down here are a little bit stronger farther down on the plant. Especially if you're exhibiting roses, you go down farther so you get a stronger cane that will be starting for your next round of blooms. Here in North Carolina in the summer, I'm trying to keep as many leaves as possible. I've lost leaves because of disease and spider mites, so I want as many solar panels or leaves to produce energy for the plant. So I tend to just cup them off near the top. I don't worry about what leaf set. I'm trying to preserve as many leaves as possible. But again, you ideally want to get it when it's kind of at this stage here. So the bloom is obviously spent. You don't want to wait until you get to that stage because it's just later. And like I said, Mother Nature is going to take care of itself. You can see some disease on this leaf now, but the petals will eventually fall off and it will eventually regenerate new blooms. But you're just speeding that process up by at least a couple weeks by deadheading. So I need to do the deadheading. I know I need to because my wife is starting to clean up some of the garden. So I know I'm a little bit past ideal time to get this done. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of maintenance, the reason why I'm getting this done, we're expecting a rainy period coming up. So it's just better to get this done when it's dry out. But if you saw a video, I guess it was a good 6 weeks ago, our last flush, when you have a lot of blooms on the bushes, they tend to weigh over and you have to start to stake them. I'll show you this in a second. This is Silver Cream, a John Smith rose. But if you've been following this video blog, we had the same thing happen with Alina back in May. It had so many blooms it fell over. It looked like it was going to die. And if you saw that video, I staked it up. Well, that's what I need to do with some of these other plants. One tip on that, and the reason why I'm hustling with the deadheading, when you have a lot of spent blooms on the plant, it's going to naturally start to lean over. In addition, if you get heavy rain, that rain collects in the blooms and it weighs it down. And you'll see the difference. I'm going to do this real quick. Usually I would put the blooms in this container. I'll do that after the video. But look how much this rose bush is leaning. Again, I'll back up. You can see most of the canes are straight, but this one is leaning quite a bit. That's all from the heaviness of the petals. So if you're anticipating some heavy rain or wind and you have a lot of blooms in the garden and you start to see some things leaning, you're going to want to remove those blooms and stake this up. You can see how much is bent over. So watch how much this lifts up by me just cutting all the blooms off. Now, I did this demonstration back in the spring. You can click on the video below. It was much more dramatic when these were rain-filled blooms. So you can see it's gradually lifting up because I'm removing the weight of the blooms. When these are filled with water, it becomes really, really heavy and the plant can sag. Eventually, if you're not careful, you can break off a cane and damage the bush itself. So you certainly don't want that to happen. So deadheading, again, removes the chances for disease and insects in the garden, and you might need to do a little maintenance. And look how I'm still going to need to stake it, but you see how it's starting to spring up just by removing those spent blooms. When I'm talking about staking, I have two different types of stakes in the garden. I use conduit pipe. Comes in 10-foot sections, cut it in half. It's a nice 5-foot stake, pound it into the ground, and you've still got 3.5, 4 feet or so to work with. I use those to stake the main part of the rose bush to hold the whole weight. And then I really like these green, they're kind of the size of what bamboo would be, but they're plastic. I like these skinnier ones to stake up these canes that have come down. So I'll put this in the ground. And the other thing I like to do, and you've probably seen it on the with the Alina, I like to use this green flexible tape. It can bend, it can stretch. I ordered that on Amazon. It's just gardening tape. It comes in big rolls, and I use that a lot because I really like the flexibility of it. Here's Ring of Fire, potted up in a 5-gallon from K&M, and here's the green stakes I'm talking about. And again, this is real flexible. So you can twist it, bend it, cut it, whatever you need to do. So I'm going to get going here before we get rain here later today and the rest of this week. Finish the deadheading. And again, we do that after the flush of blooms is over to get on with the next set of blooms, which should be late August into September here for our third round. In addition, if I get all the deadheading done today, I'm going to go around, and I've lost some leaves because of disease and spider mites. These leaves in the beds of your mulch are harbingers of future disease and pest. So much like you're removing your blooms to speed up the growth, but also to limit disease and pests, having a clean garden bed is important as well. So I'm going to pick up these old leaves that are either diseased or might still have some spider mites on them, clean up the bed. So this process after blooms is all about cleaning the garden, preparing it for the next round, removing the spent blooms, removing any leaf litter from the beds themselves. When I finally get all that done, and you can tell it's going to be a lot of work because I've got a lot of, here's another one that just fell over recently. This is a Let Freedom Ring. So even on the ground, it's looking, you can't beat that. That is amazing, folks. And this is why we grow hybrid tea roses. It's like a fresh tomato from the garden. You can't beat fresh blooms compared to what you could get in the store. Again, I like this one as well. This is Claire Elise from John Smith. Always distracted by the blooms. But my last point was, you can see I got a lot of work ahead of me with the deadheading and then cleaning up the leaves in the garden. You can see those down below. Once I'm done all that, I'm going to put down our third round of fertilization. Keep in mind, we did the first round back at spring pruning, so late winter, early spring. That prepares the roses for the next 5 to 7 weeks in the first flush. We did our second fertilization back in May. And again, I'm talking slow release, either synthetics or organics, to prepare for the second flush. And now, once we're deadheaded and clean the garden, we'll do our third round of slow release. We're talking alfalfa meal, cottonseed meal, 18612, a generic Osmocote, and that will get it through the rest of July and August and prepare for our third flush of blooms. So a lot of folks ask, when should I fertilize? A real good time is when the flush is over, the plant needs a lot of energy to get going on to the next flush of blooms, and that's a good time to do it. So your first spring pruning in the late winter and spring, and then after each flush of blooms. If you live up north, again, you might only do this at the spring pruning in May, and then again in late June and July. You might only do it twice. Whereas here in North Carolina, we have 4 and sometimes as many as 5 flushes of blooms. So I'll do it multiple times throughout the growing season. And every 5 to 7 weeks is certainly reasonable to provide some energy and food for these plants to grow. And you can tell they're growing well. This is approaching 8 feet. This is Hot Princess. I may cut this down a little bit for the fall blooms. And this is the tallest Gemini's ever been. It's up there as well. So they might look terrible since they're spent blooms, but growth-wise, the garden is kicking butt this year for sure. All right, folks, have a good one. I'm going to try to hurry up before we get rain later today and the rest of this week. I hope all is well, everybody's staying healthy, and we will be making more videos. I appreciate those that have already subscribed. Don't forget to get the latest updates. Just hit the subscribe button so you get the notification that a new video has been posted. Have a great day, everybody.